Sure. I guess I'll kind of reflect back to my first year. And it's funny because I sat right around there and I thought to myself, oh my goodness, this first year has flown by and I don't think I have covered enough. I don't think I've taught well enough. And I'm like, wow, I've got to kind of step it up a little bit. Um, and that's one of the challenges of being in the College of Ed is that you've got so many really good teachers. And it helps you, it kind of pushes you. And so I can, just being very thankful that that first year was coming close to an end. And I said this the other day, the best part about being a rookie is you're only a rookie once. So then after that, you just start adding on to your experience. Um, so as far as just that, that feeling in your first year, you may be trying to measure yourself up to a certain degree. And what I would say is just give yourself some space. Give yourself some space because there's a very good possibility that you have some incredible veterans around here, and they just like you had to take time to learn their craft. That the art of teaching, and that it was something that I was hard for me to grasp at first. Coming from coaching, it was natural to interact, but it's a little bit different to be able to take content, explain it, expect them to learn it in some way and demonstrate that they learn it to you. And so that was a little bit more of a challenge uh, for me. But I would just say give yourself a little bit of space and a little space to breathe because if you reflect, and I'll be honest, that when it took me about 3 years to begin to really see the pack and the par for what it was. If you would ask me my first 3 years, this was just academic gymnastics, and I'm just being straight up honest with you. It was just something that they wanted, that we were asked to do to make sure that we were doing our job. Now, again, that shows you the immaturity that I had at that time in my thinking. But now to be able to see it as an opportunity for me to find the things that I want to get better at and then focus in on them. And no one says you have to do it all. But what is it? What class? What part of your teaching do you want to get better at? And that's what I began to see the benefit of it and the other reflective piece of it. Now, I do need to ask this question. How many of you have never worked at a liberal arts university before? You guys raise your hands for me? Okay. I'm just going to be honest with you too. I just started figuring it out about 2 years ago because I came from big universities. I didn't understand, and I didn't, in many ways, unfortunately, respect the aspect of liberal arts until recently. And I was so focused in my area, in my zone, that I just took for granted that everyone else was doing the same thing in theirs. But the idea and the practicality of what the liberal arts offers is really, it's really what's changed. And next semester will be 10 years for me. It's hard to believe. And in coaching, in reality, this is the longest I've ever stayed in one place. The longest I've ever stayed. Before in coaching, you move around, that's part of it. So all that to say this is that don't be overwhelmed. Don't be overwhelmed. Don't be overly critical. And there's a difference between trying to be critical of oneself, but then there's another part of being able to find areas to improve in. So trying to strike that right balance so that you're not beating yourself up, about I should be doing this, I should have done this. And the other side of it too is that I came from a postdoc at Baylor University, and I was very blessed to be in an area that had at least $5.5 million of research equipment. And when I came to Lee, there wasn't anything really, and that was just the difference of it. So understanding some of those expectations and where you're at and where you're going to go, sometimes it just takes time. It takes time to let things develop.
Well, that echoes a lot of the things that I was thinking about as well as I was reflecting. I had a slightly different experience in that I came in January actually. So this came up really fast for me. The end of the school year was the end of my first semester. It was like, whoa, how did that happen? But I had taught in a K-12 setting for 5 years, so I had teaching experience, but learning how Lee differed. My other teaching experience had been at Purdue, so a big state school. So one of the biggest things that I learned going through that first semester and in the first year was just how to do this at Lee and kind of the distinctives of Lee, the culture of Lee, and how to interact with my students in a way that matched their expectations, that matched kind of getting them from where they came in to where I wanted them to leave, figuring out how all of that worked. And I had the added benefit of I was a Lee alum. I went here as a student, so I knew Lee in my head, but I knew it from the student perspective. So that first semester and that first year, we're still figuring out how does this look? How does Lee look from the other side of the coin? And there was a lot that I had to learn about that. And so, yeah, at the end of the first semester, I was not where I wanted to be. And very similar experience looking at all the teachers and the science math faculty and going, how do they have such high expectations and get their students there? And, how do we do this in a way, you teach chemistry and the students are like, you have to learn all of this. We have to do this. We have to get through this material. There's no wiggle room. Come with me. We're flying. But how do I get them there when they need help? And when they come in going, okay, first day, you've surpassed all the chemistry I've ever had in high school. Now what do I do? It was just very eye-opening and a very interesting experience. But one of the things I really appreciate about Lee is there are faculty and your peers who will come alongside you and share ideas with you. And so I met with my mentor and it was like, okay, how do I change things? How do I do things? How do I grow things? And he was wonderful at giving me ideas and tips. And so there was, but like I said, I couldn't do it all at once. It's been a gradual process, a constant improving process. I haven't stayed teaching the same courses very long, so it's always a constant new thing. But the nursing has been really fun for me, the chemistry for nursing, because it was probably one of the biggest challenges of how do I now take this content that I've taught for years and teach it all through this lens instead. And so there are just so many resources. As you finish your first year, you've survived, you've learned some things you want to work on, and I would agree with Mike. As you develop your PAC and your PAR, think about what do I want to improve on? Pick something you want to improve on, something you want to improve on. And it's a slow, gradual process. And I still don't feel like I'm there. I still feel like I've got a long way to go in things that I want to work on and to do. But I feel like there's so much support and desire to help me succeed. I know there's so much going on your first year that these sessions at the CTE are very helpful when you get all this information. But when I came back as a mentor, I felt like, okay, now I'm actually ready to really process this and use all of this, and it's even more beneficial because I had a little bit more of that experience built on and more of an understanding of the students and where they were coming from and kind of how that looked. But there are, one of the things that I've loved the most is watching other faculty teach and seeing different tricks and things that they've learned, different ways of setting up expectations for their students that make the whole process easier than I did my first time because I didn't know how to set their expectations the way I needed to. And so it's a learning process. And so as you look back over the year and I would agree with Mike, as you look at your filling out your PAR and you look back, you're not going to have done everything you wanted to. That's perfectly normal. But talking with other faculty, talking with your chair or your dean on, kind of where do we go from here? How does this work at Lee? How can I do this at Lee in a way that is most effective? That to me has been the most beneficial.
You both mentioned the PNC and the PAR, and Mike, you want to talk a little bit more about that? Mike's now a department chair, so he's seeing all this administrative paperwork from a little bit different perspective this year.
And I will say this is that the opportunity to be able to serve on faculty council and be the faculty council chair has been very beneficial. It has been a huge blessing for me because I have sat in on tenure and review committee meetings. And so this is with the cabinet and Dr. Khan and the chair, and to get to listen to see how teachers are being evaluated. And now, as a chair, here I am in that seat, and I think to myself, okay, what is it that I can do to help best prepare my faculty as they try to matriculate? And so that's important. You know, that's important. And I would say communication with your chair is really important because he or she is going to be your voice as you go and as your materials are presented. So it's when you think about your PAC and your PAR, and especially how things have changed a little bit now with the service piece of it, it's one of these that I want to encourage you to find the areas where God has gifted you in the area of service and go there. Don't try to recreate something that isn't you. And this is how my example. In being able to teach benevolence and some of those, you know, I've done different types of service projects. Personally, my favorite kind of service project is cleaning up, being able to build something so when it's all said and done, you can sit back and look and you're like, and especially with your students, and go, look what you have done. Look what you've done. The more difficult one for me is the more developmental side, and being able to, you know, feeding someone and those types of things is great, but finding opportunities to serve that were, I could see that I'd made some type of difference. So I hope you guys understand that. And again, everyone has different strengths. I'm a huge proponent of strengths and being able to find those areas. So don't try to recreate or go somewhere that you're not knit for. And I choose that word specifically. We were all knit together with a specific purpose. And it's just a matter of being able to find those things. So as you begin to think about your teaching, I would encourage you is that just think about ways to be able to measure your teaching and that you can then articulate at the end of the year. And if you didn't do as well as you hoped you had done, you know, that's okay. But oftentimes what administrators are looking for is growth. That's really what they're looking for, that your teaching is important to you and that you're trying to get better. And listen, I was laughing, Sarah said she hasn't made it yet. I haven't made it yet. It's not perfect. You know, it's not the way I'd want it. But my heart's desire is to try to get better and try to get better and try to get better. So I just, again, I don't know how you look at your PAC and your PAR, but I just want you to think about it as a way for you. It's really a personal development plan. That's really what it is. What do I want to try to get better at? And then, you know, the aspect of where does scholarship fit in and where does service fit in? Because we can't be just one-dimensional. You know, our students come to us in a lot of different places and in a lot of different situations, and you don't always have that opportunity standing in front of class or going somewhere to have some of those conversations. And that's why advising is important, and then wherever you choose to get involved. So that's, you know, again, I just want to encourage you as you think about that. It's just a personal development project for you.
And I would say also, don't freak out about it this time, because you really were taking a shot in the dark when you wrote your BAC in the fall. And you may have been all completely off in what your goals were, either too high or too low, or stuff you never actually did or were supposed to do or whatever. They may just be, you know, maybe the spaghetti didn't stick to the wall. So don't freak out about it this time, but really kind of learn from what you did this time, how to really maybe craft one that makes more sense for next semester. And then, because really, I mean, that's what people look at. People know you don't know what you're doing the first day you're on campus and you write it. We want you to try it. We want you to take a shot at it, but no one's going to say, yeah, no, I don't think we can rehire her because her first PAC was just
Oh, yeah.
just really pathetic. I mean, nobody's going to say that. And now now you have to do the other end of it, which is write your personal activities report based on that contract. And sometimes that's gonna be, this is as hard as it'll be. The first time you do it is as hard as it'll be. It gets easier. So don't let that freak you out this time, I would say. Sarah, you wanna talk a little bit about student first evaluations and how you take those?
That was another part of the learning experience for me. Coming from a K-12 setting or a place like Purdue, they care about what the students learned. They really don't care what the students thought about what they learned and how they experienced it. If you got your point across, they're happy, and that's it. So going through the evaluations and how important that is from a Lee perspective, how important it is that not only that the students are learning what they want, but they're getting that Lee experience, that contact and interaction with the professor, was very different for me. And I'm one that I tend to take everything to heart. So I have to prepare myself to go through my evaluations, and I have to remember and remind myself continuously, okay, we're looking for trends. We're not just focusing on the highs or the lows. We're looking for the trends. And that's hard. You're going to read those comments that are just like, oh, and you're going to read some, you're going to be like, I know exactly who said that. And if you had just come to class, you would know that we did that. But, it's learning to take it a little bit with a grain of salt, but just looking for what are the big things? What are the big messages here? What are the things I'm seeing over and over from class to class? What are the things I can improve on? And that's really kind of how I've learned to kind of refocus. My husband's evaluations are much better than mine, and so he reads them and he's like, I needed that. That was so encouraging. I'm like, oh, okay, I'll get there eventually. He doesn't teach chemistry now.
That's right.
So one thing I had heard someone in a professional workshop say is when they did their workshops, they did evaluations and they actually had two sheets. There was the we really like this sheet, and there was the need to work on this sheet. And at the end, when they would read kind of right after the workshop, when they were exhausted, they would read the I really like, and it would be encouraging. And then they'd wait a little bit, and as they started to think about the next workshop, they would focus on these are the things to work on for the next time, because now they were a little bit more detached from it, and they could think of it as, okay, this is what I need to improve on, this is what I need to select to work on. And so we don't separate out the evaluations there, it's all mixed up, but I try to kind of focus the first read through and say, okay, what are some of the positives, what are things I need to make sure I keep doing, because it's easy for me to focus on the negatives. And if my students say, I really like how you do this, well, then that's also important to note, because I need to keep doing that. And then what are the trends or that are things that I need to do differently and need to work on for the future? And again, sitting down with your mentor and talking through that. Your department chair will go through your evaluations and look for some of those high and low trends and stuff as well. But sitting down with your mentor then and saying, okay, this is what I'm seeing. What are you seeing? Is this a big deal? How is this going to be taken? And then our department chair encourages us, if we know that there's this one comment and we know exactly who it is and what the situation, they're not identified, but we remember, you can kind of pick out, then if that's something that needs to be addressed in the PAR, that's something that you can talk about as well and submit or talk about with them so that they know, okay, I remember when this happened and this is kind of what was going on. And so thinking through those things, that is kind of why it's useful to do it fairly soon after you get them. But, again, focus on, don't let either end. Don't be completely distracted by, it was all good and there's nothing to improve in, or don't be, it was horrible, now what do I do? And so there is that learning to balance it. And your department chair and your mentor can also talk with you about kind of what are key things for Lee, what are things that are, they're really going to focus on with the tenure and the review, what are some of the questions that they look at a little bit more heavily than other questions. And for me, that was very helpful to kind of think about, okay, this one is very big. And some of them, department-wise, your department may have more of a strength or a weakness in an area, and then how do we do this in this department? How does this look? There are certain things that in the humanities, it's much easier for my husband to do than in a chemistry course. And so those are things that you can talk about with your mentor and say, okay, how does this look for us specifically, and how can I grow in this? What are some ideas for that?
Do you guys have any questions about that? What did you got evaluations for first semester? any reflection on that, or any comments, questions? I would say now that you have that, that's the basis for writing the goals for next year. That's the easiest way to write goals. If you have something that's kind of off the chart, off the norm, that can, kind of stands out. Your numbers are usually better than your comments. I always feel wonderful when I see my numbers, and then you open the comments like, why did you give me a 5 if you thought it was that bad? So, bolster your ego a little bit with the numbers before you open the comments. But then I think that those trends, as she said, will help you write goals for next year.
And I would say I always have them. I always have them both open at the same time. So when I'm writing my PAR, I have a document that's my pack for next year, so I can go ahead and jot some notes down of these are things that I want to consider for my pack for next year, and then I can refine it and stuff. But otherwise, it's like, oh, you go through the summer, it's like, now what was I working on? What did I want to improve on? And then as I write my pack, I'm looking back at my PAR to kind of say, okay, yes, those were the big things. That still makes sense. This is still where I want to head. So I always have one open when I write the other one.
First of all, when Carolyn asked me to come, I was really humbled because you don't ever think of yourself as, I don't know, being successful. And as and I've been thinking about this for a while, about what were some of the things that had helped me to be successful. And actually, there was a question that during the administrators retreat that Dr. Khan had asked, but it really resonated with me, and I really wanted to share with each of you, is that I want you to think for a second, how will you measure your success, you personally? How are you going to measure your victories, your ties, and your losses? How are you going to do that? Because so much, I think, of what we do and who we are at Lee has to do with interaction with students. It has to do with that. And then sometimes it's a challenge when you have a really, really big class. Obviously, in most cases, it's easier to get smaller to try to build those relationships. But the other side of it is that, in labs or in advising, those are the times. One thing I love about athletics, and you've probably seen this as well, players always knew if you were real or not. Because if you were fake or a fraud, they sniff you out in a heartbeat, and they call you on it. So it was always important, to me to be genuine and to be real with them. And even when it's bad news, even when you have to say, listen, you're underperforming. And sometimes no one's ever sat down with a student before and said, listen, you're underperforming. How can I help? And if they don't know what to do, then they haven't thought about that process of themselves on how to be successful in the classroom. But one of the things that I hold on to is that, how do I measure success? And one way, you guys know what these are? That's right. And this is not for your eyes. This is only for mine. And it is cards like these notes, these messages, that a student will take the time, graduation, and drop them off, slide them under your door, that provide so much encouragement to me. Because sometimes you really don't know, guys. We really don't know when you say that one thing to that one student that kind of can change everything. And you'll reflect on it, and you were just doing business as usual. You were just going out and caring for the student the way you would want someone to care for one of your own. And it just happens that way. And I think that's part of just trying to think of, where your heart is in this. And trying to identify what that success looks like. I had a great friend of mine one time who said that, when you look at big research institutions, they're going to have this 12, 13 PhD students in there. And you just try to crank them out, right? You try to crank them out, and you get all these people who had graduated under yours. And he had mentioned to me that he left a R1 to go to not an R1. And he says, now I have 2 graduate students, 2 master students, not even PhD. And he says, I may not be changing the world, but I'm changing their world. Do you guys catch that? Sometimes we think about the masses, and it's not about the masses, it's about the one. And I think that's maybe what's unique about us, is that it's the one and we don't know. And I promise y'all, sometimes I miss it, and sometimes I'm aggravated because I reach out, and I get ignored, or worse, they cop an attitude with me. And, then your heart starts hardening. So it's one of these things that I want you guys to begin to really think about. I have really thought a lot lately that God has a different economy than ours. I used to think one of my greatest challenges with being here at Lee was the salary. Because I have a wife that's a stay-at-home and 2 boys. And dadgum, if every time I turn around, they need new shoes. And they keep eating and they get hungry, and I'm thinking, man, how am I going to do this? And yes, there are practical needs like that, and there are opportunities later on that you can look into to try to earn some extra money here. But the reality of it is that I'm trying to build up some treasures in heaven, y'all. It's really what we're trying to do, or that I'm trying to do. There's 3 things I try to tell my boys each morning before they leave. Honor God, be teachable, and give great effort. So if I'm going to tell them, then I need to live by that myself. And, as you kind of walk through this, know that you're not walking alone. I can't, I won't speak for Sarah, but I'm pretty sure if you want to know just come ask us. That's what I love about our faculty, is that we have great faculty. Just come and ask. You want to look at some of my pack and pars? Feel free. You have to sign a letter of confidentiality, though, so you don't laugh. But anyway.
Mike serious about that. He taught one of Rebecca's classes, and she observed him. I know that in the first year you guys feel like you can barely breathe and eat, much less go around observing classes and doing all sorts of things like that. But as time goes on and you get a little bit more under your belt and feel a little bit more, like you've prepared classes a couple times and it's not as hard the second time. I think it really, really is good to watch other people teach. And most people at Lee are pretty open to that. So, or if you want me to set something up for you, I'm glad to do that. Because I think it's really helpful. As Sarah said, if you ever have a spare hour to go in and watch somebody else, just to see how their demeanor is with the class and how they manage the routine of the classroom, and it doesn't have to be in your discipline. I think you can always learn something. I love, part of my job, people will come and say, I'm having a problem in this area, I need your help. And so I go and watch them teach, and I love doing that. That's really my favorite thing, I love doing that. And then just sit down with them and say, well, I don't know your discipline, but here's what I'd say. I would do this, and when you did this, I think the students were thinking this, and if you could just bring that back this way or whatever. I love doing that. And I think, I learn something every time I watch somebody teach, and it doesn't matter if they're a first-year teacher, I learn something and get ideas, and I can see things that I do in my class that I may need to change. So I think it's really helpful if you have a chance to watch somebody else teach. And also, just what I said, I'd be glad to come help you at any point if you feel like that's something you need, or if you get your reviews back and there's something you didn't expect. It's like, whoa, I didn't have any idea I was having a problem with that. And if you want me to come help you with that, I absolutely love doing it. So please just feel free to let me know. I would really like to normalize that. I don't want it to feel like remedial. I want it to feel like we help each other. And that's kind of what our job is, really. Anybody have any questions for them? Any fears you have for the end of the semester or life in the future?
And one thing I may encourage you guys, this is a safe place. I really want you to know that. So
if you win, you grab it, got your department chair.
So, one of my problems I had last semester is I had a student that came in, this is right before reviews were supposed to be filled out, and told me that himself and other students were disappointed because I was new and that that means I should be easier. And so they came in with expectations because they had had a new professor when they started at Lee, when they were like freshmen. I think it was some other professor's first time. And so they were like, he was easy and he showed us so much grace. And like, I told them, I said to Colin, just because you don't see grace doesn't mean you're not receiving it. Like, I'm thinking in my head, I'd be glad to go back through every single one of your tests. So I guess my question is, and I'm still not quite sure how to deal with it, but as new faculty, I think students have expectations that they've developed from working with pros like yourself, and so I'm just not quite sure how to, I don't want to say lower their expectations is not the right word, but make sure we're kind of on the same page. It's like, yes, I'm new, however, you know what I mean? Like,
Oh boy, do I.
I'll
Go
let you
ahead,
take this. Well, I didn't have as much of a problem with that as a new faculty member, but I actually had kind of the other. So they did think I was too hard and not enough grace. I had a student my first semester appeal their grade because they said, I spent so much time working in this class. I must have read the chapter 5 times. Well, that's nice, but you didn't learn what you needed to learn. And so part of what I learned was just setting up their expectations at the beginning of the semester. I now take time on the first day to say, I put up a picture, for me, it's football players, and I say, how many of you think I could be a pro quarterback in the NFL? And, you have a couple of nice ones that say, yes, you could do it, I'm like, you've never seen me play football.
We're going to ask credit for that?
Yeah, exactly. It's like, there's no way. I am not coordinated enough. I know football. I know the sport, but I am not coordinated enough to actually play it. And there's no changing that. God didn't build me to play. And so changing the expectations from it's not time, it's here's the level you have to meet. I will do everything I can to help you get there. But don't spend. I now tell them you should not spend more than 10 minutes on a problem ever, because their problems are relatively speaking, very short. And so I say, if you've spent 10 minutes, stop. Come see me. We'll walk through it together. I'll make sure you understand it. Let's work smarter, not harder. Time doesn't equal anything. And so there is some ways of managing expectations in that respect, but I didn't have anyone who thought because I was new I was just going to be easy. But I also, the first day of class, emphasized teaching experience, not just teaching at least, so I had that to go on and stuff. So they knew I was new, but I was also not new to teaching, and so my situation may have been a little different.
One thing I found is clarifying expectations. That is extremely important. And the other part is really testing. If you can give them a sample test or sample questions, but this is what the questions are going to look like before weeks before the first test. If you have essay questions, give them a sample of here is what a sample question looks like. But not only that, you show them what an A+ answer looks like. Because I'm going to tell you what, students know. They know. They know when they've studied or or that they've just kind of blown it off. So if you show them what an A+ answer looks like, then they're going to be like, oh. So again, I believe it's being able to show them what the expectation is. So now when that first exam comes and they see that, ooh, this is hard, that they're not going to be as surprised. So I think any opportunities to be able to demonstrate them, because I think that's the one thing that I've experienced and have had some comments on as well, is that they felt like they were kind of ambushed by my exam, and they didn't know what to expect, and then all of a sudden, my demeanor in class is one thing, but then when you get my exam, it's another. I thought you were a nice guy. I thought you were cool. You made jokes and stuff. What is this? You paid your fee? You want your D? What? But I think that is something that I think is helpful. Show them what an A+ looks like whenever you can. So now in their mind, they kind of have it set. And I know it's difficult. I want to let you know, but grading with a rubric is also helpful because it guides you. And so there's some things on that One other suggestion is you just think about objectives. Now listen, I know how hard it is and the information that you have to cover and the amount of time that you have for those in the nursing program, and I get that. And I think it's kind of this idea of trial and error to a certain degree. But don't ever think that, as a matter of fact, what I found out is that when you're honest up front and you're hard, students respect that more. Because they know they're just not going to walk in there and show up, hang around, be on their phone. And I'd also say that to communicate with them that I'm doing this because I care. And again, I don't know if most of you know this, but I come from a coaching background, as I've mentioned before, in athletics. And I sit down with my students and I tell them, listen, when you finish your degree, you're going to have to compete with someone for a job. So what are you going to do that separates yourself from everyone else? And that resonates with a lot of students. And the earlier we can kind of help them to understand that, no one's going to just hand you a job. So just thinking about that, being as crystal clear as possible on expectations.
This often comes up with new faculty about, do we have to be easy? Because they seem to expect that we're going to be. And I would say what Sarah said, that is, you have to have a level that you're going for, but you also have to build the scaffolding to help them get there. And they may take it or leave it. They may not rise to what you give them to help them. So they may not come into the class, they may not come into your office and work problems with you, but I know a student who was given a testimonial in January at that University Fishbowl talked about sitting in Sarah's office and doing homework and having Sarah help her, and that's the only way she made it. So she's graduating this semester.
As a major. She did it.
So, sometimes kids come in with academic deficits that they're not their problem. They're not their fault. I mean, they came from schools that were weak, or they just never had a chance. For example, with chemistry in particular, they didn't have the resources at their school to have a good chemistry program, so they can't do it when they get there. And so that not saying, we would never say that, okay, then you gotta lower the standard so they only have to get this high. You have to say, no, you still gotta get here, but here's some steps maybe you can take that I can help you. And maybe it'll take 2 semesters.
And I've had that, sorry. I've had that happen with some students as well where, it's like you weren't prepared. So it's okay that you're doing it twice. Let's take it the second time. And it makes so much more sense to them and it's so much easier. And they're like, I can do this now. I'm like, yes, I had no doubt that you would be able to do it. You just needed a little help getting there, and that's not your fault, but now you've overcome that, and it's going to make you so much stronger going forward in all of your other classes, and it's going to make them easier. So that's a hard discussion sometimes to have with students, but sometimes, that's what they need, and emphasizing that yes, they can do it is important. But I would also agree with Mike and just echo showing the expectations. For chemistry problems, there's certain ways we do things, and if you don't do it quite that way, it means something completely different or it doesn't quite work. And so we do problems on the board first where I have them do it. And I say, okay, here's how I would grade it. This would be, you'd lose points here, you'd lose points here, and they can see exactly where everything would go. But they did it kind of in a group first, so it's not one person's work and they're not, feeling like I'm attacking their knowledge of it. And then we do a quiz where I can give them individual feedback and say, you're still not doing this, and we have to represent it this way or it means something different. And so, here's where you lose points, but I can give them that feedback on a low stakes thing so that when they take their exam and it's more high stakes, then they're not losing the points there. So building those expectations in a way where you're not just hitting them the first time saying, and you failed, is very helpful for a lot of our students. And those conversations for those that don't have the background, don't know how to study, don't know, here's some tricks, let's try this, and we'll keep adding to your repertoire until we find a system that works for you. And I'll show, my whole class, I'll say, hey, these are some of the things that my previous students have found helpful for studying this material. This might be helpful for you, you might want to do this. And so giving them some of those things means you shouldn't have to, and you you can't, especially in something like nursing. You can't lower expectations beyond the minimum competencies. They have to meet them, but we can help you get there. And I think showing them the expectations, but how they can get there is very valuable.
Mentors, you have anything to add? Thanks for hanging in to the bitter end, by the way, mentors.
Mine's not really a question, mine's more of a time of confession. But what I found hard was having the students come prepared, because I didn't feel like I was ahead enough to give them ahead of assignments ahead of time.
Sure.
Because I'm still reading a chapter, for next Tuesday. And so I felt like that they would come unprepared, hey, what are we gonna talk about today? They had absolutely no idea, or they, hadn't read ahead, and so then they couldn't even ask intelligent questions because it was the first time they had heard the material. And I found that frustrating. So that's definitely something that I've got to work on, about how to get them engaged from the beginning. When they get there, they know what we're talking about and are already at least brushed up and familiar with it, so then we can talk about it and engage with it rather than, how you spell that, or what chapter, what page?
Yeah, and finding ways to do that again will vary from department and class and different things, whether it's, some classes we have them do readings and they have to post to a discussion on Moodle before they come, so that they've given us an indication that we do IQs, an idea and a question. Or now we changed it to IQ plus. There's an idea, a question, and then something else to reflect on. But there's something that they're posting before they come. For some classes that works really well. For other classes,
Is that kind of what you?
it's kind of, it's like their ticket in. For our education course, I also teach the secondary methods. For that one, we actually have them posted the night before, so that, in the morning or during lunch that day, we can look through them, and that kind of helps us focus on what we need to talk, because we only get to see them once a week. And so, we need to really go, okay, this is an area they all had questions on the reading. So for them, it's not just their ticket in the door, they have to do it the night before. So it's fresh, but it's not, and they have time to work on it, but it gives us a chance that we can see it and respond, so that they didn't ask us the same question, multiple people asked the same question, and we totally didn't know, and we see it afterwards and then have to wait a week to address it. But with our science classes, we use a program called Chem 21, that they have to learn the vocabulary and the facts and the stuff, and they learn those before we cover the materials, so that as they learn the things they have to memorize, now we can work on building the concepts that go with that memorization. But we can't do the concepts if they haven't memorized the basics. So we have them doing those on an ongoing basis. They learn they have to be working on them pretty much every day, to keep up with it and stuff, because it makes them space it out. It's not something you can cram, because there are timers, and when they learn it to a certain level, they have to wait at least 6 hours or 12 hours, whatever you put in, and then they have to show that they still have it at that level. And so, it's that repetition, but it's that very purposeful repetition. So there are a lot of different tools for kind of helping them, guide them, but those take time to build. And talking again to other professors, nursing, again, you don't have as many people you don't have someone who's taught the course before says, oh yeah, I use this, and can hand it to you.
Then we change the textbooks. No!
Yeah.
I just read that one.
But you'll get different, those will take more time to build, but as you work together, you'll be able to kind of talk about, okay, these are things we can do together to kind of help them with this type of concept or this type of concept. This is a tool that will work better.
I just learned something this semester from Delia Price, because she had a class before mine, and she had an agenda. And she just wrote up her agenda on the board, objectives on the board, and there were some in different colors. So the first one color was review. And there was discussion time that she would use as a review at the beginning. Here are the review questions. And then just a few minutes to go back over what the last few classes were about. Then there'd be another color of particular content that they were going to either discuss or cover. And there was a third color for homework. So when they walked in, those students knew exactly what was expected of them. And there wasn't this, I didn't see it on the board. Well, it was written in blue. Blue means homework. Green is review. Red is whatever. And so that's one of the, and also that helps us, doesn't it, when we're trying to teach, because it kind of helps keep us on track with the best we can. Because I'm also a big fan of teachable moments. There's sometimes when those teachable moments come and everything kind of gets pushed to the side, because here might be one of these conversations that they're going to talk about with friends and their kids because it's so impactful. So understand, trying to find that flexibility.
I wanted to say, one thing you were talking about, kind of how you were surprised when the students came up and said that to you. Something that I've said to, now, Mark has taught a lot before he came here, but to other mentors is when you have those first classes, you just get started, is I suggest to do sort of a mid-course review. And it's not really evaluations, but it's like basically 3 questions. How's it going? What are you liking about the class? What would you want to change? And then you initially, and what it says to the students is that you care about what they have to say, and it gives you those themes or ideas of what may be going on, so that at the end, if you get those horrible evaluations, and you're totally shocked and you had no idea, at least it's kind of a mid-course, and then going back and talking, and I do this. I've been teaching, and I'll talk about some of the themes that I see, and we'll discuss it in class. It doesn't mean I'm going to always change it. It depends on how if it makes sense, and I think it's fair, then I'll discuss it with them. So, just as a new teacher, that might be something you want to try next semester, is kind of doing a mid-course and just kind of check the temperature in the room, see how things are going, and students really appreciate that, and I think you'll find that your evaluations will be better, just because you took the time to ask, what was going on, and you were listening to them.
And even something saying, I can't change this and here's why. This is why I'm purposefully doing it this way. And I'll do this again through Moodle as an anonymous feedback, but if 90% of the class submits it, then everybody gets, like 2 bonus points on something, but it's valuable to do, and I continue to, because each group of students is different. It doesn't matter if you taught the same course. I've never done this long because I keep changing courses, but it doesn't matter if you taught, the most I've taught is the same course 3 times. It doesn't matter if it's my 3rd or 4th time doing it. It's a different group of students. So how do I need to adjust for this group? And so I think it's valuable to continue doing.
Something I do that I know no one will want to do because it's not techy at all. But I have a folder for each student in every class. It's their personal folder. And on the one side I have clocks, and we do clock buddies, so if I ever want to pair them up, the first thing we do to get acquainted, they have to go around and make appointments with each other, 2 people and so on. So when we pair up, they get their 8 o'clock appointment, they get with them, and then so that's just, but then in every class, if I have, it's their own personal folder, everything goes in it. If I get a handout, if someone's not there, the handout will be there when they come back. I will have to go spin it around. Send that to me or send me, at least it helps me. It keeps me so organized. And it's a little difficult up front to get it done. But once it's done, once those folders are made and their name is on there, I keep their, things about them that I need to know. I may jot a little note. If I want to encourage them, I put it's all in a little personal folder. But it's just initially setting it up is okay. But after that, they're smooth. And I keep them in my file cabinet, my sections, my classes. So they're used to it now. At first they go, oh.
Forever? I mean, like until I graduate? Or
Well,
just for that class? Or?
just for that class, but I'll put them away in case I need to go. But I really keep that stuff on Google. I don't need to have it in folders or silly, but I recycle.
I'll create an Outlook contact for each student. I just import it from the roster, but then it has, it has more information than I ever use. I go ahead and import, their address, their home address and everything, which I don't usually use, unless they live locally and stuff. But then anytime I talk to the student, I can just pull it up in the notes section, this day, this is what we met, this is what we talked about, so that I can remember that, because that keeps, and putting their pictures in helps me learn their names faster, because there's not an automatic import for the pictures, so I do have to go through each one and just drag them over and stuff, but it helps me learn who they are, and then when they send me an email, I can see their face and say, yes, that's who you are.
And that's how picky people do it. Sarah's a genius with Moodle. She knows more about Moodle
Just
than
by
anybody.
years of experience.
Well, let's call it a day, semester and year.